Hi everyone, and welcome to the Bechdel Plus podcast. Yes, it's finally time. You've been asking me to do this for at least the past 5 years, and well, I have so many excuses, but it doesn't matter. It's here, it's now, so let's go. So, what is this podcast going to be about? Well, the plan is to do 3 things. The first part is to create an audio version of my Plus reports. The thing is that my Plus reports are very, very long. On average, they take about 20 to 25 minutes to read, and because of this, many of you have asked if I could create an audio version of this so that you could listen to it while you were doing other things, like commuting to work or exercising at the gym or cooking dinner or whatever. And this is a brilliant idea, something I should have done many years ago. So that's the first part. So simply create an audio version of my Plus reports. The second part is about things that are important to talk about right now. This could be things that publishers do that relates to important trends in the media. It could be new revenue models or audience models that are worth talking about. And it will also be about more general things that just happens every single day that are important to look at. Mind you, Bechdel Plus is not a news service. What I do is to provide you with strategic analysis about media trends, and that's what this will be about as well. There are plenty of sites out there that will provide you with news, but what I do here is to take a step back and look at things from a broader perspective. So that's the second part. To have ongoing discussions about what is relevant right now. The third part is that I really want to add a conversational element to this podcast. What I mean by this is that I think this podcast could be so much better if I invited someone to create this podcast with me. Now, I've been thinking about this for a long time, but it is incredibly complicated. For one thing, you have to find a great person to do it with. I have a number of people that I'm thinking about, but that leads us to the second problem. What about payments? You see, right now, this podcast is paid for by, well, you. As a Bechdel Plus subscriber, you are paying for this podcast through your subscriptions. And with that subscription, you get everything that is Bechdel Plus. But if I invite someone to create this podcast with me, I have to somehow pay them. But the complication here is that I don't want to do this as a type of a boss-employee type of relationship. I don't want to hire people to work for me. I want to work with people. And there's a lot of complications there, and it's going to take me a long time to really get to that point. So hopefully later this year, I will have figured something out and I can introduce you to someone new and we can add this third element to the podcast because I really do think it would make it so much better. So these are the 3 things that I'm planning to do and I am really excited about it. But now let's get to the topics of this week's episode. For the first story this week, let's talk about Facebook and publishers and what happens if you stop using Facebook. Now, you might remember an article that I wrote back in February about a Danish TV station who had decided to see what would happen if they stopped using Facebook for 2 weeks. It was a really interesting experiment. But now another newspaper in Denmark have tried to do the same experiment, and this time for 3 weeks. So let's compare these two experiments and see what we can learn from them. First, let's go back to the original story. Back in February, I wrote about this Danish TV station who had stopped using Facebook for 2 weeks. And there was some really interesting data that was revealed because of it. First of all, there was some negative elements to it. Their users dropped by 27%, their sessions dropped by 20%, page views dropped by 10%. And this, of course, is not something most publishers would want to see. Nobody wants to lose their traffic. But more worrying was that they lost their community engagement. For a local news station, this is a bit of a problem. One of the key elements of local news today is that you really need to focus on driving local engagement. So by just focusing on broadcasting and not really communicating with people, you lose a lot of the very important elements that makes you a local news station today. But these were the bad things. So what were the good things? Well, the good things were all very interesting. First of all, the value of that traffic went up quite a bit. People spent 42% more time reading their articles, and they read 12% more per session. They also noticed a less polarized view. Before, when they were still using Facebook, they often saw how a single article would get most of the views, whereas without Facebook, they noticed a more even spread across all the articles. As they explain, when they usually posted 3 to 4 articles, one of them would get all the traffic, while the rest would not get the same level of attention. But without Facebook, all articles had an evenly distributed share of traffic. They also noticed that the traffic patterns evened out and became much more stable, because the Facebook algorithm no longer influenced what articles should be seen. Now, mind you, it's important to understand here that what they're talking about isn't a growth in behavior. When they say that people spend 42% more time, it's not really that people are spending more. It's just that without the Facebook traffic, the audience that they have left are spending 42% more than what they had before. So this is a really interesting example of just how big a difference there is between the traffic that we get from Facebook and the traffic we get through other means. Facebook has always been a bit of a weird place in terms of traffic behavior. It's hyper optimized for what I call a low intent micro moment, and we see this all the time. When people are using Facebook, they don't really think about what they're doing. They're just watching random articles, looking at random things, and sometimes that happens to be a news article. So by filtering out that traffic, we see just how big a difference that makes. And in this case, it's 42%. Mind you, you should be able to test for this without cutting out your Facebook traffic. Go into your analytics system and create 2 segments. One segment is for all the people coming from Facebook, and the other segment is for all the people who don't. And just look at what you find. What is the difference in reading behavior? What is the difference in how much time they spend on their site? This is something that you can see right now. They discovered some other things as well. For instance, they discovered that without the constant distraction of posting on Facebook, they had more resources to think about new things. Now, we have probably all experienced this ourselves, maybe not on Facebook, but on things like Twitter. It is such a time sink. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it because it's an important part of our job, but it's very interesting to see just how big a difference it makes when you stop doing it. Finally, and this is something I find quite interesting, when they stopped using Facebook, the number of angry reader letters dropped to 0. So not being on Facebook removed the animosity that people otherwise had to deal with every day. I don't really know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a very interesting thing to see just how much of an emotional effect we see from the social channels. And it's not always a good thing. So these were the things that TV Midwest found, and this was a study that they did earlier this year. Now let's talk about what this other newspaper did just last month. The other newspaper is a national newspaper in Denmark called Information, or Information as we would say. If you want to compare it to something, you would probably compare it to a newspaper like The Guardian. It doesn't have the global element that The Guardian has, but if you think about The Guardian just within the UK, Information would be kind of the same thing. So back in May, they decided to do the same test as TV Midwest of trying to see what would happen if they stopped using Facebook. The reason for why they wanted to do this was because they were noticing how their Facebook traffic was dropping. And on top of that, they had focused more on premium content. So they wanted to see just how big of an impact Facebook really had on them. Now, like TV Midwest, they found a number of interesting things, and let's go through them one by one. First of all, they noticed that their traffic dropped by 14% overall, which isn't really that much compared to the 27% for TV Midwest. But what's really interesting is when we look at the details. If we only look at the Facebook traffic, we notice that before they had 18% of their traffic coming from Facebook, but now, after they have dropped Facebook, only 9% of their traffic came from Facebook. Now, wait a minute, you might say. If they dropped the traffic that came from Facebook, why are they still getting 9%? The reason is that there are two ways that we can get traffic from Facebook. One is through the things that we share ourselves, and the other is what other people share for us. So the 9% that they still got was from other people sharing their articles on Facebook. And this is very interesting because it tells us how much of the traffic that is coming from others compared to what is coming from themselves. And in this case, it's 50-50. Now, what's also interesting about this test is that while the traffic dropped overall, the subscription rate stayed about the same. I'm not sure that 3 weeks is truly a long enough time to tell if this would stick in the future. One of the reasons is that we know that when you're trying to sell subscriptions, the momentum that you build up over time has a really big impact on it. So while they didn't see a drop in subscription rate within those 3 weeks, it might be a problem in terms of building up momentum later on, but we don't know this. But it's fascinating to see that at least within those 3 weeks, it didn't have an effect. Information also found that not having to post articles to Facebook several times per day was incredibly liberating, and it freed up other resources. This was the same thing as TV Midwest found, that not having this pressure of constantly having to engage socially meant that they could do things in a more relaxed way than what they could do before. However, they also found, just as TV Midwest did, that not being on Facebook meant that they were losing a lot of community engagement. A very important element of the future of media is to make sure that you are engaging with your audience. I'm not saying this necessarily has to be on Facebook, but we can't live in a broadcast world anymore, so the community engagement is really important. However, one thing that was different was that, unlike with TV Midwest, Information found that people wouldn't come by themselves. What's interesting about Information is that they have two types of traffic boosts throughout the day. One is in the morning when they're sending out a morning newsletters to all their subscribers, about 50,000 people, which gives them a very nice morning traffic boost. And then they also have a midday traffic boost from all the people who are coming from Facebook who are just having a break. What they found when they stopped using Facebook was that this midday traffic boost evened out. Now this of course is a bit of a problem, and it's not an easy thing to fix. One might say that you could perhaps create a midday lunch type of newsletter that you would send out to people, but you have to consider what moments people have. One of the reasons why you get this Facebook boost during lunch is because people are just having a break. It's not because they want to read the news. So this is the type of traffic that you only get because of a certain type of moment. There were also some weird elements to their experiment. For instance, when they looked at the time spent, they didn't really see any noticeable difference. people spent on average about 3.2 minutes per article, and this didn't really change that much before and after they stopped using Facebook. But like with TV Midwest, they did see a boost in reading time by their most loyal audience by about 22%. Now, this is a bit weird because if the average time didn't change, but the most loyal readers did see a boost of 22% in reading time, what happened to the rest? I mean, why didn't the average time change? So while they say that they didn't see any noticeable difference, obviously there must be some difference that they are just not seeing. Now, I don't know what this is. They didn't detail it, but this is one of those things where it just doesn't add up. So just like with TV Midwest, this experiment was really interesting. And you will notice that there are a lot of things that they both have in common. Now, Information has not made any decisions about their future strategies. They are back to using Facebook just like before. And the only thing they're saying is that in the future, they will evaluate this and maybe come to some conclusions about how to change things. What they are doing is that they are very heavily promoting their newsletter because they have realized just how important that really is. So what we see here are some very interesting patterns across two different experiments. From the perspective of a media analyst, what I notice are three things. First of all, we notice how publishers are no longer in love with Facebook. If you think back to 5 years ago, you would notice how many publishers would go out and say, "Oh my God, follow us on Facebook, it's awesome." But today, publishers don't really see it that way anymore. We also see how Facebook is very, very clearly a niche type of behavior. Every single time we see these experiments, we notice how big of a difference there is between the traffic coming from Facebook and the traffic coming from other sources. And this tells us that Facebook is not this generalized mass market platform that we once thought it was, but is instead just a niche channel for a very specific type of behavior. Finally, we also see that Facebook is not really a revenue channel. It's more a marketing channel. We see this when you stop using Facebook and it doesn't really have any impact on your subscription rates or your loyal audience. So Facebook is maybe important in terms of building up early momentum. It may be important in terms of the funnel of getting people to come to you. But as a distribution platform and as a revenue channel, it's not Facebook that you should be focusing on. Now, we will probably see many more experiments like this in the future, but I don't really think that we are going to see that much of a variations in them. The patterns of what defines Facebook are pretty clear, and unless Facebook makes some radical changes to how the newsfeed works, I don't really see the behaviors of Facebook changing that much. In any case, these experiments are extremely interesting and I love seeing them because we can learn so much from them. So publishers, please keep at it, keep doing these experiments, and don't just do them with Facebook. Try to do different types of holdout tests with different things, and if you can, please share them with us, because the more we can learn about this, the better we can all get. For the second story this week, we need to have a talk about GDPR. GDPR has already come into effect, as we all know, and we are starting to see some interesting messages from the EU about how they're going to react to this. One example was a court case that ended just last week, where a Luxembourg court ordered that the owner of a fan page was legally responsible for how their data was collected on Facebook. Now, this is a pretty important case because it's one of the first examples where we see the question of data controllers versus data processors come into effect. In the media world, there is a general idea that as a data controller, you're not really responsible for what your data processors do. Very often we see media people talk about that whatever it is that is happening on their site is not really their responsibility, and it's up to the ad tech world to fix it. Well, this case puts a stop to that. And it puts the burden of responsibility solely on the data controllers. As the Reuters reported, the case stems from a dispute between a German fan page on Facebook, which used the social network to store cookies on visitors' hard drives to collect data about them. When a German data protection authority ordered the operator of the fan page, an education company, to deactivate it because visitors were not informed about the collection of their personal data, the company argued that it was not responsible for the processing of the personal data by Facebook and that any action should be brought against the social network. According to the court, the fact that an administrator of a fan page uses the platform provided by Facebook in order to benefit from the associated services cannot exempt it from compliance with its obligations concerning the protection of personal data. The administrator takes part in deciding what data to collect and how to process it. Now, this is important because it means that it's always the data controller, in this case the administrator, who are responsible for the relationship between a fan page and the audience. And in media terms, that also means that it is the publishers who are fully responsible for whatever data that is being collected between a newspaper and its audience. It doesn't matter who we are using, what ad tech partners we have, we are responsible as publishers. Now, this is just the first case, and interesting enough, this case was started before GDPR came into effect, but we can be pretty sure that we will see similar cases like this throughout the rest of the year, and they will probably come to the same conclusion. What's also important to understand here is the relationship between the regulators and us as publishers. Over the past couple of weeks, I've had many discussions with people in the media industry about GDPR, and the general consensus is that it's not their problem to fix. And what publishers are saying is that it's up to the regulators to make sure that the ad tech world are in compliance with GDPR. But this is not actually how it works. In terms of GDPR, it's us as data controllers who are fully responsible, which also means that it's up to us to fix whatever problem that we might have with the system. So if an ad tech company doesn't do what it's supposed to, it's up to us as publishers to fix this. Now, this is no different than from any other industry. I wrote about this on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, where I gave the example of a fashion company. Imagine that you went to a company like H&M and you bought a t-shirt, and then a week later you discovered that this t-shirt was manufactured using child labor on a factory in Bangladesh. Now, my question to you is this: who are you going to blame as a customer when you realize that the t-shirt that you were wearing was made by a child? Are you going to blame the factory in Bangladesh? Or are you going to go to H&M's Facebook page and write a negative review about them saying, hey, H&M, why are you using factories that uses child labor? It's the same thing about the regulators. If the regulators wanted to stop child labor from happening, and they discovered that H&M was using a supplier that did so, the regulators are not going to travel to Bangladesh and then try to stop the factory. Instead, they would call up H&M and they would say, you have to stop using that supplier. So in the media world, we are now faced with the same problem. It is true that a lot of the things that is happening in the ad tech world is both outside our control, very, very frustrating, and doesn't really work the way it's supposed to work. But that doesn't change that we are the only ones who are responsible for this. So if one of our suppliers, in this case an ad tech company, isn't living up to their responsibilities, it's our job to make sure that they either do or that we drop them. Now, I know this is an easy thing for me to say, and I understand all the complexities and all the problems that we are facing, but in terms of GDPR, this problem can only be fixed by us. It's not going to be fixed by the ad tech companies. It's not going to be fixed by IAB. It's up to us to put our foot down and say, we can't allow this anymore. And it's important that we do this, because if we don't, what the EU will do is they will come after us as publishers. This is what they did with this education company in Luxembourg. This company was just using Facebook like any other company, and they didn't really realize that the data was being collected in a way that was against the data protection laws. But it was, and the courts have now said that it's the education company who are responsible for this. They're not going to fine Facebook because in terms of GDPR, they can't. The only companies that the legislators can find are the data controllers. In this case, the education company, or in our case, what we do as publishers. So it's us who are going to get fined, not the partners that we have. So I just want to put this out there. I can talk for hours about GDPR and all the problems we have with this. In fact, what I've seen from how publishers have implemented this is really bad. The key point here is that this whole problem is on us. We have to fix this. Nobody else is going to fix this for us. And as frustrating and as hard as that may sound, this is really the only way that we can find a way to do better. So stop waiting for the legislators to try to fix this for you. That's not going to happen. And stop just blaming the AgTech world for all the things they're doing wrong. I agree that they are doing a lot of things wrong, but we have to fix that. We have to redefine the world that exists around us. We have to choose the suppliers that we have. And we have to create a new world where the standards of GDPR becomes something that we can use to our advantage instead of what we see today, where it's just the most annoying thing that we have ever presented to our audiences. So let's get our hands dirty and start changing this to our advantage. So this was the first episode of the Backdoll Plus podcast. I hope you liked it. Of course, if you have any feedback, any questions, any suggestions, please send them to me, hit me up on my email or ask me on Twitter. Obviously, there's still a lot of things that I need to do about this podcast, and there are so many things I need to learn. Just the concept of using my voice to tell a story is not something I'm used to, and you can probably hear it in this podcast. You might also have noticed that there are variations in the pitch or the tone of the voice as I am talking. And this is mostly just due to the position of the microphone and the sound settings and all of those things I still have to figure out. Some of the other things that I did in order to make this a reality was that I needed to do a lot of things here in my home office. I want to give you a little example of this. Here's a very short sample of a test I did about a month ago where I tried to record a podcast using just the microphones and the setup I had in my home office. And as you can hear, it was really, really bad. And in order to fix it, I had to go out and buy a much better microphone. I had to buy some acoustic paneling and do a lot of other things. But listen to the difference between a month ago and what you're hearing now. Welcome back to the Backdoll Plus podcast. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Backdoll Plus podcast. So that is a pretty crazy difference in sound quality, and there's still a lot of things that I could do to make it even better. But I hope you like it, and please share it with everyone you know. The key driver of success for Backdoll Plus is to get people to subscribe. I'm not monetized by advertising in any way. The only reason why this is possible is because I have people like you who are subscribing to this podcast. So please share it. Please tell your friends. Get them to try out Backdoll Plus, or just get them to subscribe to this podcast. And thank you for listening.
Want to keep it nice and clean, not freak out and cause a scene. I try to hold it together, keep it together. Not sure who I really am, just be cute and super bland. I try to hold it together, keep it together. Been playing it down, but I'm so getting tired. Now won't you meet high? 'Cause I've been feeling that crazy, and I need to lose control. So baby, put the record on, baby, put the record on. start to let off some steam. I'm not the one to say never, never say never. Been playing it down, but I'm so getting tired. Now won't you meet high? 'Cause I've been feeling that crazy, and I need to lose control. So baby, put the record on. Baby, put the record on. Hit it. And I've been needing that crazy, and I gotta let it go. So baby, put the record on. Am I gonna need that song? Hit it. Come, come, come with me. I'm gonna get this party lit. Come, come, come with me. Let's do something we'll regret.
Come, come, come with me. I'm gonna get this party lit. Come, come, come with me. Let's do something we'll regret.
'Cause I